Please, enough. No, more.
Our topic today on Please, Enough, No, More is Privileged Access Management, or PAM. Now, Mike, I'll ask the question I always ask on this segment. What have you heard enough about with PAM, and what would you like to hear a lot more?
I think to some extent I sound like a broken record, but I'm also consistent in that I've heard so many manual processes related to privileged access management where companies are handling things with spreadsheets, which I just can't even imagine what that world is like.
That sounds mind-numbing.
It sounds terrible, doesn't it?
That could be a what's worse scenario.
It could be. Then there's also standalone solutions. The idea that, this one thing, you go and buy it and it handles all of your privileged access management and doesn't talk with any other systems. Nothing can talk with it. So it's kind of this standalone, isolated solution. I've seen that in the market, and that's also a terrible solution. It introduces its own problems. So that's the I've heard enough of. Mm-hmm. But from a more perspective, I think there's the opportunities for automation. There's the opportunities for integration. I'd like to hear more about auditing capabilities. And the real maybe extra credit there is taking audit trails and doing automatic analysis of them. So make sense of what is going on, provide some patterns, provide some ideas of, hey, here's what's actually going on beyond simply an audit trail. So that's what I'd like to see more of, is automation, integration, and really making use of an audit trail.
I like it. Now, that hasn't been a broken record. By the way, that is new. Brandon Traffenstedt, who works for CyberArk, which is a privileged access management solution. What have you heard enough about it with PAM, and what would you like to hear a lot more?
So the what I've heard enough of element is a notion that PAM is easy. In many cases, you'll see things like remove local administrative rights in 3 days, or rotate all of your domain administrative credentials across all of your environments in a month. Admittedly, doing something like baking a cake can be considered to be easy, but we take a lot of the elements of baking a cake for granted. And the reason this is top of mind is that since being at home a little bit more, we've been doing quarantine cake, which is just a reason for a household full of grown adults to have cake every week. And we've sort of built a pattern. And if you think about it, baking a cake implies that you have a recipe. So we have a process. We understand that we're going to use baking soda instead of baking powder, for instance, or we're going to use all-purpose flour instead of self-rising, which I've completely learned the differences of, and you can test me if you want to. But if we don't have that recipe, then having all the ingredients makes no sense. Likewise, we need technology, right? We need powerful solutions that don't exist in a vacuum to help us bake this cake. For instance, an oven. You ever tried baking a cake over an open flame? I don't think it works. I've not tried it, though. Same is true of things like measuring cups, mixing bowls, all that good stuff. So yeah, throwing together a cake with a recipe and with powerful technology is easier than it would have been without. But this is a program. Privileged access management or privileged access security is something that we commit to, but we want to make sure that we've got powerful processes and technology, as well as we're enabling people to help us with it. So yeah, it's easy if you got all the right stuff.
So it's easy if you've got all the right stuff. So what makes one have all the right stuff, I guess? And if you don't mind, pull back on the metaphors a little so I can follow you, but a little bit closer.
Sure. So admittedly, I'm biased.
Please be biased. No, I want to hear.
So I think the most important part is recognizing that this thing is a program. It's something that can be built. Once we've had that realization, we can now start to put in the appropriate controls. And those controls could be making sure that when we're talking with vendors who provide this as a service, we challenge them on some of the things that Mike mentioned. Do you integrate with X, Y, and Z? Can you be more proactive in terms of onboarding or in terms of taking the audit information and doing something? And I'll give you an example. Say we have begun managing every single access key and secret key pair we have in AWS. A pretty tall order, but let's say that we got it done. A couple of weeks later, an AWS key is used without accessing our PAM solution first. That's kind of weird. I may even go as far to say that's something like credential theft. Solutions that help with the automation element, make that proverbial cake easier to make, could do something along the lines of, hey, we looked at the CloudWatch logs, we saw this secret being used out of band. But don't worry, we went ahead and performed a rotation invalidating that secret. And you can do your correlation in your SOC later on down the line. But by taking a step to give your first responders more time to respond, we've created additional value in a solution. And there are sorts of anecdotes like that all over the different programs and blueprints that folks have put together to adopt, or to help with adoption, rather.
And by the way, legitimate credentials, we know that from the Verizon DBIR, that people who essentially hack systems are doing it through legitimate credentials. And there's all these sort of solutions, and PAM being a very significant one, to deal with this very problem, that people who already have legitimate credentials to prevent them from having persistent access. What would be, I guess, a good way for a company to be better prepared before and during while having a privileged access management solution?
So the preparation begins in, number one, analyzing the amount of standing access that you're giving. Some users may need to have, say, managed alt credentials, the things they would use to access the domain in a very privileged capacity. But this is an opportunity to move away from that, to move towards a more functional account approach, or at the very least, to minimize that as much as you can. In smaller organizations, sometimes much of our IT staff is doing a more functional role. So they've got 3 or 4 different hats that they're wearing. In larger organizations that have grown from small ones, that type of access may continue to persist. So look at ways that you can pare that back a little bit through the use of shared but greatly scrutinized IDs, and do things like obfuscating the secrets from end users. If we're leveraging one of these powerful secrets that has standing access, integrate with things like your ticketing systems to make sure that the appropriate ITSM flows are going through, or better yet, allow users to just connect to the node without knowing what that secret is, so you can rotate it as often as you'd like to. The final thing that I'll mention here is that even though we're talking about the creamy, nougaty secrets that make our stomachs sick when we think about them being compromised, attacks start on the endpoint. And typically, the first element of vertical escalation is using a local user's built-in administrative rights. So if you've got a bunch of users with local admin rights, I was a developer in a previous life, that was me. I had IDEs that always needed admin. Look at ways to elevate them based on policy, not always give them that local admin. So make sure that we've got ticketing system integrations to where if we need to see a credential, we can put in the appropriate change, or obfuscate secrets from users outright and work to remove or lower the amount of standing privileges those end users have available to them day to day.